even if there's a truce in Ukraine, I see, knowing the whole story of Central Europe, actually from Western through to the East, that you will have wars of revengeance, you will have civil wars, you will have. That's the problem. The Middle East is looking extremely concerning at the moment because it does look to me as if we're in a phase of nuclear proliferation. And can it go global? It goes global if the main operational, tactical, and strategic MO of China is mischief. Because if it is, we're in trouble.
So you and I are singing off the same song sheet when it comes to the operational level of war. Do you think Zelensky and his team are right at focusing on what they're doing and writing down this Russian operational level, their railways, their oil refining capability, their strategic bombers, their airfields, they're assassinating their generals, knowing full well that they can't generate sufficient combat power to have a decisive effect at the tactical level? Or do you think the Ukrainians are trying to balance both off? Are they going to try a tactical counterattack themselves this summer?
No, I don't think they should. And I wonder if the message is getting through. They've had some very good NATO advisors, I think, whom we should probably keep quiet about, and saying that you made a terrible mess with your summer offensive of 23, where they tried to do an all arms, which they can't do, by the way. And they can't do anything much above even approaching division level. They operate as really rather independent brigades. And a lot of the really good Brit analysis that I've seen, and they've been working it through with the Poles as well, and it's very sensible, saying, make a virtue out of your vice, and it's not necessarily a vice. As you know, Fibua, the old fighting in built-up areas. The one thing that, particularly in trying to do the policing in West Belfast in the very early days, the worst thing is when you had to try and have an all-coordinated battle group operation. Then you got individual company groups and platoons shooting at each other. Well, much the same seems to apply of what's going on in Ukraine. And you've got these rather ferocious, I think, eye-wateringly frightening brigades, but doing their own thing as to running their own procurement chains. But some of them are absolutely ingenious. Whoever's going to be the future czar of Legoland should get out there and find out how to do it. This do it yourself, putting things together, getting resupply from the rear, but understanding what they do at the front and what you have to assemble at the front, I think has been completely brilliant. And of course, they have setbacks. You get new innovations like the optic fiber drones. The place is festooned with optic fibers, which must be quite an obstacle now. They seems to be moving around that and moving to it. But I think the thing that's going to get the lawfare rather than warfare people going is that I think they're focusing very heavily on the operational depth battle now. That they're really going to plug away. But the other thing where they have fed British military doctrine is maintaining the strategic and active rear, which is this thing that, the defense correspondents were completely baffled when Rowley Walker and his team came up with the idea that the battle we're looking at is the back to front battle, the front to the back and the back to the front. And actually, when you heard them describe it, and knowing a few of the coves involved, and they have learned very directly from the Ukrainians, it makes absolute sense. And that's what the British all-back with the army is going to be. The concentration on the flexible, capable rear that you've got to be able to. We're not going to be on the front line in Europe, but that's absolutely understood. We will have the Rapid Reaction Corps as the flexible second line reserve. And then it all begins to make sense. We lead with Germany and Poland on the front on one side, and France. If you ever get France to do anything cooperatively that they felt that they haven't invented themselves, you'll be lucky. But that's the way it works. But you can say that I'm sort of a bit bouncy about this. That I just feel a lot of the torpor is going away in NATO now because they know probably they might have used the rather naughty word that Trump used yesterday. Otherwise, we are completely done if we allow things to go on as they did.
Well, yeah, and going on as they did, it's interesting you talk about the inventiveness of the Ukrainians and everything else. Zelensky at the NATO summit turned around and said that Ukraine is only utilizing 60% of its domestic military production due to a lack of funds, and could produce over 8 million drones a year. That's, the mind boggles with that.
I think they could, by the way.
Yeah, I think we've got 3 FPV drones in the British Army at the moment. And then Rutte comes back in and says, it's simply unthinkable that Russia, with an economy 25 times smaller than NATO's, should be able to outproduce us and outgun us. And this is what we need to understand. Russia's as a threat only really exists because we allow it. Are we starting to wake up to a realization that we should be beating them through our greater economic strength, and do we have the political will to do it? And are we getting our support for Ukraine wrong?
I think I don't want to use weasel words. We have to adjust it. And yes, there are things that are wrong. Quite right, Philip. But you see, the thing is, I doesn't want to give the game away. But I think that this is where our operatives, who've really learnt the lesson, are doing the workaround. Where is the best British tactical and sub-operational drone production? It's all to do with Ukraine, and a hell of a lot of it is in Ukraine. That's the really interesting thing. They know this blah 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 because the Brits actually do know that they, as you know, they've learnt the lesson of ghastly things like Ajax and Watchkeeper. Watchkeeper in its day was a perfectly decent drone, and oops, as you know, we used it really rather a lot when it was called the Hermes LH-415. It was under contract, piloted for us by Israelis. I think we'll keep quiet about the rest of that.
Piloted by people who knew how to pilot things rather than people who knew how to fire artillery shells.
Absolutely. And I think this is the story. And I think the sense of workaround, I do think, is very, very good indeed at the moment. And because I think that this is where the armed forces are acting absolutely in their own interest, because take risk, it's going to be a bit hairy, but that's part of the contract with the nation if you join the armed forces. But actually, you can use your brains and move around. I do quite like it. All 3 major services are now saying you can join us, but don't have to wear a uniform or bash a square. But which is quite good. They're very keen. They're very keen on that. But where I worry, I was hearing Vice Admiral Burns, the fleet commander, yesterday, give a very good talk, saying where the Navy is. We must have a national conversation. Well, the conversation is there to be had, but the way they're going about it, I don't blame them. But the way they're going about it is completely hopeless. And I'm afraid you don't go around about trying to generate a serious national conversation about this kind of thing on the Today programme or Channel 4 News.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of mixed messaging and confusion coming out. On the way across to The Hague on Air Force One, Donald Trump refused to define what Article 5 support meant to him and the US, and is suggesting that there's different interpretations. We've seen Spain. We've seen Spain opting out of the defense expenditure up to 5% that's going through. Is Donald Trump actually trying to rewrite the founding principle of NATO, which is Article 5, attacking one is attacking all, or is he just being practical?
First, find your pen, to rewrite it. Spain, I think, is hilarious, and that came out just at the time that when they asked Spain to do a bit of about not revealing the overflight of the B2s into the Iran-Israel airspace, and what Sanchez came up with, I did find very interesting and does show, to answer your question, where we're going on this. We get what we can from NATO. We're not a major player, and we're not on the major NATO front, although Spain is on a very important front across the Maghreb. And we understand that, and we put in what we expect to get out. And for the time being, they're saying, Spain, we have got such a point of main effort on other fronts at the moment. They let that sit. And it must be said that Spain has done its bit in the Red Sea and things like that. Not great, I understand. But that is not a rule. They could say, oh, but that's a precedent. Now, about Trump, I really rather like it. He couldn't quote Article 5 for you. But where he is right, and I've looked at it with the British MOD, the interpretation of Article 5, it's not one of the 10 commandments. It's not absolutely... Philip, you know this. It is open to interpretation, and it was put to me like that. I think it was Ben Hodges, or one of our leaders, said, The response expected, it's a request for solidarity, primarily, unless the whole world is going mad with a big thermonuclear attack. But if it's a regional incursion, say the Baltics, which is quite likely, we would expect a response of solidarity appropriate to the threat and action. So, and I do think that Latvia particularly is vulnerable at the moment, as is the Suwalki Gap. Now, I would not expect Spain or Luxembourg to put forces in for that, and they would not primarily be consulted, but you would expect the whole gang of the JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, the Baltics, and so on, right down to the Dutch. And I think the Dutch would take it seriously, and of course the Balkans, and we'd forget that, and they're in a very awkward position, Romania and Bulgaria. And I think that you do have to be pragmatic. Don't expect too much from Hungary under Orban, and you can't expect anything. And Czechia is very difficult because of Slovakia. That's reality and that's politics. But what I think NATO is very good at, supposing the balloon went up, supposing and it wasn't Armageddon. Supposing there was a real and a serious attack, and I think it's likely to come in space and cyber, the first next really serious invocation, it would go to the NAC, which is very difficult to explain to colleagues that actually, very strangely, NATO has a democratic credential. It pretends and it plays, and I think, it's my more generous interpretation of Trump, and I'm usually very ungenerous, but it's this thing about, it's what I call the Holly Golightly factor. In the famous novella, Breakfast at Tiffany's, you know why Holly Golightly played brilliantly, go and see the film again, by the glorious Audrey Hepburn. They said Holly Golightly wasn't really a phony. Do you remember why she wasn't a phony? She wasn't a phony because she was really phony about the things that she was phony about. And this is it. It's a game, and we play it, and let's do it. Let's call the 200 something delegates to the NAC and say, yeah, put it to you. Refer back to your parliament.
Well, we've only done it once, and that was supporting the United States over the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers, and and I've seen lots of NAC decisions and all the rest of it, and support can come in many different ways, from providing good military capability to you getting a moonpig card in the post saying, "Hey, we support you. Good luck," and all of that would fall into the Article 5 definition.
Didn't that happen in 91? Not the incursion into Iraq, but Iraq's incursion driving the Kurds across into Turkey. And Turkey did inquire quite legitimately whether this was an attack. And they considered it, and they said, no, there will be solidarity and support. And famously, Meteorong John Major, they did Operation Haven and put in that rescue mission for the Kurds. But it was discussed then, yeah.
Okay, you are hugely experienced, and you've been in a position where you're providing lots of advice to different people and different organizations. I'm now going to put you into the theoretical position where you are special advisor to President Zelensky. You're looking at what the future for Ukraine is, the conflict that's going on in Europe. What would you be giving him as advice as to how he can take things forward? And do you think the comment that came out of the new Sakura, the new American general Grinkovich, who said to Congress as he was being assessed for his appointment, "Senator, I think Ukraine can win. I think when your own homeland is threatened, you fight with a stubbornness that is hard for us to understand unless we've been there ourselves." Could you bring that together and give Zelensky some decent advice?
I think he's like Marcus Aurelius. I think he's a Stoic, and I think that he looks at fate and tries to smile at it. And he is a tremendous. He knows victory isn't round the corner, but what he must do, which he is so skilled at, is to keep the military option and the diplomatic option going at the same time. And he knows he's got to deal with the gangsters over the border, but within his own border. He's got a very difficult situation. And the fact that the man must be absolutely exhausted, but he does have good relations, good personal relations. And the thing is that it is the goodwill of Europeans and we forget about it, the Ukrainian diaspora, which is so important. Yeah, Ukrainians in Australia, the Ukrainians in the US, but above all, the Ukrainian minority in Canada, which these must be listened to. And the thing is, the future of Ukraine, you are absolutely right to say, and he is right to say, it's got to be invested in. We've got to find the money for it. And I think if Putin shows any sign of aggression beyond expanding beyond Ukraine, and he looks to be almost on the cusp of it, then we've got to get those frozen assets. Just pull them out. You are an aggressor. Sorry, you're not going to get your rubles back. And pour it into Ukraine. And what they do seem to be doing sensibly is not doing the manufacture entirely in Ukraine, but in the surrounding area. And what worries me there with the new president, the election of the new old president, is Poland. Poland is absolutely, but the thing is that the Polish people sense, because of what you and I can see, Russia is doing, that Poland is threatened. What is Russia doing? Building all those installations, always up just about several hundred kilometers back from the line of confrontation, but facing the line of confrontation, particularly in Poland and Finland, as well as doing the noughties, and they will do it with cyber. I think in the Baltics. I think there is something on in some crazy conspectors, and it does look like the latter stages with the dictators in World War II, that Putin is up to some fantastical scheme. I think there's something odd. The psychodrama in his head is quite difficult to grasp. It is absolutely vitally important that we do.
Well, the amount of strategic ambiguity that's coming out from all leaders around the world. Final question today. Looking at, are we going to be talking about the conflict in Europe between Russia and Ukraine in 12 months' time, on 24 months' time? And does what's going on in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world mean that we're on a path to potentially global conflict?
Yes, yes, and yes. Because I think the conflict will go on, because even if there's a truce in Ukraine, I see, knowing the whole story of Central Europe, actually from Western through to the East, that you will have wars of revengeance, you will have civil wars, you will have, that's the problem. The Middle East is looking extremely concerning at the moment, because it does look to me as if we're in a phase of nuclear proliferation. And can it go global? It goes global if the main operational, tactical, and strategic MO of China is mischief. Because if it is, we're in trouble.
Well, Robert, on that note, I hope our politicians are listening. I hope the general public are listening, because that is why we're upping our defence expenditure significantly. We need to do it. But Robert, many thanks for chatting to me today on Times Radio Frontline.
Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.